Thank you for joining us for this conversation focused on clinical trial design to study the efficacy and safety of a novel therapy, lademirsen, to slow progression of kidney disease and Alport syndrome. There is a great deal of information for patients to consider when evaluating whether or not to participate in a clinical trial. For this reason, we feel a webinar is a great opportunity for patients to become informed through directly asking questions of the experts involved. Alport Syndrome Foundation invited the clinical trial sponsor, Sanofi Genzyme, to help patients understand the study through participating in this webinar. We've received no funding or sponsorship from Sanofi Genzyme for this webinar, and the speakers are volunteering their time at our invitation and request. The session includes approximately 25 minutes of presentation, followed by 35 minutes for questions and answers. To avoid distracting messages, we ask you please refrain from using that chat function. Please hold questions until the presentation is complete. And then we'll absolutely encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen after the presentation. I'm Lisa Bonebrake, by the way. I'm an Alport patient, parent of a patient, and executive director of Alport Syndrome Foundation. For those of you who are new to us, Alport Syndrome Foundation is the leading independent nonprofit organization in the US, educating and giving a voice to the Alport Syndrome community of patients and families. Our mission is to improve the lives of those affected by Alport Syndrome through education, empowerment, advocacy, and directly investing in research. It's important to us that patients are informed about opportunities to participate in clinical trials. And as patients, we know that we are very motivated to change our family's stories, and we understand the critical role of research in clinical trials. I'm pleased to introduce today our knowledgeable key speaker, who's been a dedicated researcher in glomerular diseases, including Alport syndrome, for many years. Dr. Shiguang Liu is Clinical Research Director of Rare Diseases and Nephrology for Sanofi Genzyme. He holds doctoral degrees in medicine and cell biology. And after joining Sanofi Genzyme in 2009, Dr. Liu has led several discovery and development programs to develop treatments for rare diseases, including the program of lademirsen for the treatment of Alport syndrome that we'll be discussing today. Dr. Liu has published more than 40 scientific papers in rare diseases, including Alport syndrome. We also have on hand with us today Mason Benjamin, who works in U.S. public affairs and patient advocacy in rare diseases for Sanofi Genzyme. Dr. Benjamin has been our main point of contact for Alport Syndrome Foundation over the past year and assisted with the planning of this webinar. If our audience today has questions related to patient advocacy and participation in the study, we can direct those to Dr. Benjamin as needed. After their presentation, I'll return to moderate with questions and answers to facilitate the discussion. And we'll now begin with Dr. Liu. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you. I'm turning things over to Dr. Liu for the presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for inviting us, and thank you for the introduction. And today I'm going to discuss and present the study of lademirsen in patients with Alport syndrome. Next slide, please. I think, for this audience, I don't have to go to all the details about the background related to Alport syndrome, but, I'll briefly touch base, with the disease itself and the current standard of care, because those are related to our current ongoing clinical trial. So as you all know, Alport syndrome is a rare inherited condition caused by genetic mutation in type 4 collagen genes. Type 4 collagens are important structure protein to form glomerular basement membrane, which is an important filtration apparatus, in kidney. So with the gene mutation in collagen 4, that will lead to a damage of the glomerular basement membrane. And with that damage, that will cause a leaky GBM, lead to a patient have hematuria and proteinuria. Long-term proteinuria can lead to chronic kidney failure. In addition to that, some patients will also have vision and a hearing problem during their late childhood or adolescence. So the current standard of care is ACE inhibitor. That is based on a lot of study. It is used as off-label, and it can delay the disease progression. The reason I want to mention this, because this is the current standard of care. In the HERA study, the current ongoing clinical trial will keep the standard of care and test the efficacy of lademirsen on top of ACE inhibitor or angiotensin receptor blockers. As you all know, the current standard of care of ACE inhibitor or ARBs can slow the disease progression, however, cannot completely stop the disease progression. So which means, like additional medicine will be needed, to treat the patient or the disease. Next slide, please. So this just, give you some general concept, how does the drug work? What is the rationale to use the lademirsen to treat Alport syndrome? In the last year, due to COVID-19, I'm sure most of you have heard more about the DNA, RNA, protein, how DNA coding a protein or how RNA can be translated into protein. So there's another group of small microRNA. It's similar to RNA, but it's very small, only about 20 pairs, base pair of in length. So the figure in the right lower panel, the corner, you can see DNA template, serve as a template to store the code for protein, and that can be transcribed into RNA. So the RNA can eventually translate into protein to perform all the functions in our body. MicroRNA, you can see there, there's a small microRNA combined to RNA to interfere the protein translation. So either by increase the degradation of mRNA or inhibit the production of protein. So microRNA 21 is one of the microRNA. It plays an important role in the process of fibrosis, including the kidney disease of Alport syndrome. miR-21 is significantly increased in both mouse model or kidney biopsy from Alport syndrome. And non-clinical data, the study in an animal model has shown miR-21 play an important role in the process of fibrosis, eventually lead to decline of your kidney function and ultimately completely loss of the kidney function. So successful reduction of miR-21 activity can potentially slow down the disease progression by inhibiting the fibrosis or scarring process in the kidney, eventually delay the end of stage disease, kidney disease. Next slide, please. So this is an oversimplified figure, just show the role of miR-21 in the process of the disease and the lademirsen, how lademirsen work. So you can see collagen 4 mutation can lead to glomerular injury, eventually lead to proteinuria. Chronic proteinuria can lead to tubular damage and glomerular damage, eventually lead to fibrosis of kidney. miR-21 is involved in the whole process by regulating different pathway related to this. Anti-miR-21 is just an antisense of small nucleotide can block the miR-21 effect to inhibit the disease progression. So oligonucleotide therapy is not new. It has 14 similar, the class drug has been proved for multiple indications. Next slide, please. So this just show like the HERA study is available. Detailed information is available in clinicaltrial.gov. If you need more information about the trial, you can go to the website to find more information. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk about, the primary objective of this study. So this study is a phase 2 double-blind study to assess the efficacy of lademirsen in patients with renal function decline. The study will also assess the safety and the tolerability of lademirsen in patients with Alport syndrome. And the second objectives are PK, the pharmacokinetic parameter, and the pharmacodynamic parameter. Basically, that means, we want to understand more how the drug is absorbed or distributed in the body and how the drug is cleared in the body. And we also look at some biomarker, including miR-21. As I mentioned, this is the drug target, for lademirsen, to see if there's any change of miR-21 and other kidney injury or function biomarker. Next slide, please. So this is a study design. The patient will be screened first. The eligible patient will be randomized into 2-to-1 ratio to either placebo or study group. So clearly, the patient will have more chance to receive the active drug. So about 15 patients will be in the placebo, about 30 patients will be in the active treatment. So the treatment is on top of ACE inhibitor or ARB. And the treatment will be a weekly injection. I'll talk about that in details later. So the length of a treatment period is about 1 year. So after the 48 weeks of double-blind treatment, all patients will be enrolled to an open label study for another 48 weeks. So in the open label stage, every patient will receive active treatment. So the treatment is a weekly subcutaneous injection, can be done in home or study size. I will talk about the injection and the schedule in the next slide. So this slide shows, how the injection, what is the subcutaneous injection, how the drug is administered, in the patient. So if you have a family member or a friend, if you know about diabetes, especially type 1 diabetes, like it happened in a younger age, insulin will be used, to treat a diabetes patient. This is something similar injection. Instead of weekly instead of a daily injection, this is a weekly injection. With that injection, a small amount, about 1 ml of either placebo or active drug, will be injected into right beneath the skin, not intramuscular injection. So this will not cause muscle pain like the vaccine for COVID. So the schedule will be weekly injection, and the eligible patient can either go to the site or will send a qualified nurse to home for the injection. So for the first injection, the observation period will be 2 hours. Within that 2 hours, nothing special. It's just like the vaccine observation. Just make sure everything's okay, see if it's any skin reaction. Start from the second injection, the observation time period will be only 15 minutes. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to present, who will be qualified for this study. So in this study, both male or female, aged from 18 to 50 years old, with confirmed diagnosis of Alport syndrome will be eligible for the study. When I say confirmed diagnosis, that will be based on the clinical diagnosis plus genetic diagnosis or kidney biopsy. So if you don't have a genetic confirmation, everyone will be offered a genetic testing for the diagnosis. So this study is focused on renal function decline. So the qualification of patient will be with eGFR between 35 to 90. And also this study will focus on rapid progressor with rapid progression of their kidney disease. The rapid progressor is defined as severe proteinuria, mainly the urine albuminuria and the creatinine ratio bigger than 100 milligram per gram of creatinine. So for male patients between age 18 to age 23, if they have eGFR less than 90, we know based on the natural history study, those patients will be rapid progressor. So regardless if they have severe proteinuria or not, those patients will be qualified. So for another group of patients, if their eGFR decreased before the enrollment in the last 3 years, the eGFR decline is more than 4 ml per year, those patients will be qualified for this study. So I want to mention here, for patient taking ACE inhibitor, we would like to have a stabilized regimen of the treatment. But if the patient cannot tolerate the ACE inhibitor or ARB, they are still eligible for the study. Next slide, please. So as most of you know, for every study, we'll have an exclusion criteria to make sure the study is valid and also to make sure the safety of the patient. If you have seen other study design, you can see this is not a very long list of exclusion criteria. There's nothing special, mainly just exclude CKD caused by other disease or individual on dialysis or renal transplantation. if patient has attended Bardoxolone study, if they stop the treatment for 90 days, they're still eligible. For the body weight of more than 110 kg, the reason we exclude that patient is the dosing regimen is a single dose level based on the estimation of body weight of 75 kilogram. So we don't want to have patient more than 50% of body weight to receive this treatment, so the dosing may not be accurate. Next slide, please. So currently we have 5 sites open in US, including Minneapolis and New York, Cleveland, Salt Lake City, and LA. The reason for that, not only because we have expert nephrologists there to treat Alport patient, those are relative bigger city or with big airport. So patient from other place can relatively easily fly into those cities to receive the study. So of course, the travel support will be available for patients. Next slide, please. So this is a list of a screening process. Again, this is our very routine, including medical history, physical exam, and electrocardiogram recording, and urine analysis, and the drug screen. So I want to mention that here we included genotyping or genetic testing for all participants if they are not already have that. So we'll also have hearing test as a screening. Next slide, please. So this is, I'm sorry for the busy slide. This just to give you an idea of what will be examined during the 1-year treatment period. Mainly urine analysis will be tested, and kidney function will be tested, and of course, like the weekly injection will be applied for every patient. So for the efficacy, we are going to measure the renal function mainly. So for whatever reason, even though it's a weekly injection schedule, if you miss 1 or 2 days, that will be acceptable for the treatment. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a more detail of summary of what will be done in the trial. Of course, we'll have a blood test. So for the blood cell count, that will be a weekly before each injection, and for renal function plus PK or PD measurement, the maximum volume will be 30 ml quarterly. So during the study, 24 hours urine collection will be done every 3 months, and a hearing test will be tested at the beginning and at the end of the study. So for PK study, which will measure the drug concentration or distribution in the body, so that will be done quarterly. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think that's all I covered, specific, for the study. Now I just would like, to zoom out from the study, just give you a general idea where we are now. So this slide just shows a general process of drug development. Typically start with non-clinical study, including animal studies, studying cell culture to make sure the drug is safe for human. And then the clinical trial will start with the healthy volunteer from a single dose to multiple dose, in a relatively small group. And if the drug is safe, then the program will move, to phase 2 study for more safety and efficacy study. So currently, we are in the phase 2 phase. So after this, we'll expand the population, the size of the study, and to have more confirmed efficacy in Alport patient. So, and then the drug will be submitted for approval. So I'll stop here and to answer any additional questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liu. Really appreciate that. Thank you for making it so clear for us. I will open this up now to the audience. Please type in using the Q&A function. Please do not use the chat function. We're focused on the Q&A section. So if you click Q and A at the bottom of your screen, please start typing questions and I will direct those questions as appropriate to Dr. Liu or Dr. Benjamin. We'll begin with a question about, and we note that the study protocol includes 2 hearing tests. Is there reason to believe that lademirsen may have some effect on hearing loss in Alport syndrome? Dr. Liu?
That's a very good question. And we know there's the unmet medical need for hearing loss. And from our survey, and for a lot of patients, actually that's very important or painful symptom. In our non-clinical study, it's difficult to measure in a mouse about their hearing loss, or we don't have the right model to do that. Even with some study in my collaboration with Dr. Grove, it's difficult, to do that. And in terms of the drug penetration, the first question we needed to answer whether the drug can penetrate into the inner ear to have effect there. So we did not directly test it because the limitation of the animal model. From the literature, there's some information about that. Even the nucleotide is relatively bigger than a typical small molecule, but it can penetrate into inner ear. The short answer is we don't have a data to say yes, but we definitely want to collect the information that. So that's why we include the hearing test at the beginning and at the end of the study.
From a patient perspective, I'll just thank you for that. We do want to know and collect as much information as we can about potential repairing to hearing. So we're glad you're included in the study. Speaking of the study design then, we're actually getting great questions. Keep them coming. Thank you, audience. One of those questions from the audience was, speaking of the study design, was what animal models were used for lademirsen and what were the results?
We have tested, like lademirsen in all animal mouse model available for that. Some of the data has already been published. Some of them I have presented in several kidney meetings before, and we are working on, or actually already finished another publication with Dr. Gross, in Germany, and published, some additional data. So we have tested lademirsen in animal models, for Alport syndrome. All the data looks very exciting.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Lademirsen is designed to slow the progression, obviously, of disease in Alport syndrome. how does the projected delay of disease progression compare with the effectiveness of current standard of care, ACE and ARB medications?
That is a great question, and we thought about that from the beginning of the study. So acting like we have tested in a relatively slow mouse model. If you're familiar with that, like a Alport syndrome, or with gene mutation in mouse model progress differently from different genetic background. In one of the genetic background, we tested that latomorphin not only can slow the progression, but have a better efficacy compared to the current standard of care. We also did the combination study to treat the Alport mouse on top of an ACE inhibitor. We observed additive and better efficacy with the combination therapy. That's why we are confident, like at least based on our animal model,
Helpful to know.
Clinical trial.
Thank you. I'm going to direct a question actually to Dr. Benjamin here, because there are quite a few questions about participating in the trial here in the question and answers or Q&A function here. One is from an audience member: how does one apply for the trial? Dr. Benjamin, is this something you can speak to for us?
Yeah, I can take that question. So if somebody thinks that they might be eligible for the trial and is interested in participating, the best thing that they should do would be to contact one of the study sites. And then the site can determine with them if they're eligible for the study, and then give them a lot more details than we're able to here about what would be involved in proceeding with that. So on one of our slides, we listed the clinicaltrials.gov listing for the study. That lists the sites, and then it has a number for Sanofi that you can also contact. We're hoping to update that shortly with contact information for the sites. But in the meantime, if there's a way that you can get a hold of the sites or call that number, that would be the best way to move forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Benjamin. And note that for the audience too, we have detailed information about the HERA study on our clinical trials page on our website, which is alportsyndrome.org, www.alportsyndrome.org. We have a clinical trials page. You can just type in clinical trials. The information is there. And if you need any help also, you can contact info@alportsyndrome.org. And we have a list of those clinical trial coordinators at the sites, and we can help connect you. We have another question, Dr. Benjamin, from an audience member asking, if you don't live where there's a clinical trial site, how can a patient participate? Approximately how many times will they have to go to the clinic? And also a related question about, someone was asking about if there's any potential help financially with traveling to a site.
Yeah, so I'll take the last point first. It's kind of related to the other ones, but if someone doesn't live near one of the sites, there are some visits in the study where they would have to travel to the clinical site. There's also options for some of the visits where the patient could be trained to do that visit at home, either with someone visiting them or self-administering it later. As far as the financial support option, essentially we have programs available to help people who are interested in participating and eligible, but otherwise might not be able to based on the finance side of things. And we don't want that to be a barrier for people. So at a high level, what I can say is that there's a couple ways of doing it. In one version, the person would be provided with kind of a prepaid card that only is usable for travel related to the study that would be able to cover some of those expenses. And then the other way is that the person could simply do the travel and pay for it themselves and then get that reimbursed as appropriate. So that's sort of what I can say at a high level, but since it depends on a person-to-person basis, what an individual would need support with, what site they're going to, and where they're coming from. The best people to contact about that would be the given site that you're interested in, which is probably the one that would be closest to you. But whichever site that is, if you contact them about what sort of logistical options are involved with that, that would be the best way to get that information.
someone is asking for the needlephobic. Would they be able to have someone else administer every injection during the study? Dr. Liu?
Yes, I got during the study with the double-blind treatment period, nurse or qualified, medical staff will do the injection, either at your home or the study site. At the same time, after 6 months, if patient want, they will be trained, to prepare for the future self-administration. So which will be available for the open label study period.
Thank you. We have a question about if there are any known side effects. I know the studies in phase 2, so there are some folks already in treatment in the clinical trial, and we have an audience member asking, are there known side effects of this drug to date?
So at this point, there's a known class effect, I can say, which is the decreased platelet. And however, that observation is observed, from a relative high dose, which is three times higher than our current treatment dose. We have enrolled patient in phase 1 study and also ongoing study. I can tell you, I'm glad so far we haven't observed or received any report of a severe, serious adverse event. And there's no report of decreased platelet so far.
That's very good news. I want to also go back a little bit about study design. A question about, to clarify, that lademirsen hasn't been studied in any other disease than this current study in Alport syndrome, as we understand. But lademirsen belongs to a class of drugs, the oligotherapy, that has been approved by the FDA, you mentioned, in about 14 other diseases or 14 other cases of being approved. Can you provide a bit more information about that sort of class of drugs, how that's been helpful in other diseases?
So, those drugs, are, class of, oligonucleotide, but they are working in a similar way. It's called, antisense, a nuclear drug, and they have been used, for genetic disease, to either inhibit, the protein expression or inhibit, protein function. So the microRNA, anti-microRNA is slightly different. It's relatively small, and as I said, it's only 20 base length, and microRNA 21 does not coding for anything. So it's mainly just bind to mRNA to inhibit the production. So in terms of a class effect, I don't think that those effects, apply to that, in terms of a target specific. So miR21 is microRNA is a unique mechanism or pathway to treat the patient.
Thank you. We have a question about the study that is currently in progress outside of the United States. Can you speak to where else the trial is, the study is up and running, and anything about how that's going?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I want to add something to the previous question. In the animal study, and it's not by us, it's published by someone else. Knockout miR21, microRNA 21, the target in the normal mouse background will not cause any genetic disease. So the microRNA only play an important role in the pathogenesis process of the disease when it's the level of expression extremely high. So that's something I want to add to that. To your question about the clinical trial, so the current ongoing trial is a global study. So we include US and the European country and UK and China. We now have just have the protocol approved in Canada. 2 sites will be open in Canada too.
And
Excellent.
I'll
Thank
add
you for that update.
Oh, sorry to cut you off, Lisa. I'll add one thing to that. For people who are curious about the specifics on that clinicaltrials.gov listing for the study, at the bottom of it, it shows the study locations. So there might be a little arrow that you have to click on to expand it, but it'll show you all the different places where the study is ongoing.
Thank you, Mason.
Thanks, Dr. Benjamin. Appreciate that. In particular, a patient is asking, I think, an important question about any side effects, particularly related to if you have seen any potassium increase. And we ask that obviously because we have a lot of Alport patients who struggle with hyperkalemia, increase of potassium, and always it's sort of an ongoing struggle with chronic kidney disease patients. And so one of the patients has asked if there's if you've seen noticed any potassium increase issues with lademirsen.
That's a great question. Since the anti-miR-21 or lademirsen target a completely different pathway, we haven't seen that in either clinical, non-clinical study or animal model or in clinical study. The answer is no, we haven't seen.
That's great. That's fantastic. Let's see. Keep those questions coming, everybody. You have really good questions. I'm very impressed with the audience. Thanks for the good questions. Keep them coming. Let's see if there are any that we have not yet answered. What is collected for the PK samples? Is that also just blood, urine? Is there something else? That's a question from the audience.
For the PK study, only blood is collected, to look at the drug level and also to look at the PD marker, which is the miR-21 and other the kidney injury marker.
Excellent. Something that I noted in the presentation, Dr. Liu, is this idea of fast progressors. It's something we all hope not to be as patients. You'd mentioned that there's certain EGFR, certain loss of kidney function over time. If, for example, you are a newly diagnosed patient, but very motivated to get involved in a clinical trial, you don't have any history of, over the last 2 years to note your kidney function progression. How do you sort of screen for folks and if you don't know if you're a fast progressor or not? Can you speak to that?
Yes, that's a great question. As I mentioned at the beginning, so the idea is, to treat faster progressor, which is defined by 4 ml progression per year. However, to expand that, and because without the history, it's difficult to compare whether we don't want to enroll a patient with a slow progressor, their EGFR level can be stable or no change within years. It's great, for the patient that they're not fast progressor, but for clinical trial, if we enroll, too many that type of patient, will not be able to see efficacy. However, the strategy we had is, to expand the potential fast progressor. As I said, if they have a severe proteinuria based on our natural history data, those patients are very likely to be a fast progressor. So we'll enroll those patients. For patient who's a male, age 12 to 23, if in this study, 18 to 23, if they have EGFR less than 90, even though they don't have EGFR measurement within last 2 or 3 years, they are also qualified.
That makes sense. I appreciate that clarification. And in fact, we have a patient who asked a sort of a deeper dive. How far back does the higher ACRU need to go? Is one recent lab enough, or do you need to have repeated results above the 1,000? Maybe you just spoke to that a little bit, but
yeah, first of all, patients, will may have that, a lab measurement in their medical record, but during the screening, as long as we have one measurement or value, the patient will be qualified.
excellent. And if you are a patient who has suspected diagnosis, I know you mentioned in the presentation confirmed, the criteria is confirmed, but it sounds like Sanofi Genzyme is generously offering to provide genetic testing if a patient does not have that. If you are a patient that has a confirmed diagnosis in your family, you are suspected, but don't yet have a biopsy or a genetic test, but you have hematuria, potentially proteinuria, you have family history confirmed, should that patient still, if they are interested, reach out for screening, and would they have their genetic testing then to see if they would be the right fit?
Yes, of course, if patients think, they meet the pre-screen criteria, and we clearly define that, with family history, with clinical diagnosis or kidney biopsy, they will be eligible for the study. In that case, we'll still offer the genetic testing, but without waiting for the final data. As you know, like the genetic testing may take a longer time. We don't want to delay that if they have a confirmed diagnosis, with a clinical diagnosis plus kidney biopsy. But if they are suspecting, like they have this, yes, of course, we'll screen that, with genetic testing.
Excellent. One thing that I found really interesting is this idea of sending, a qualified nurse to help do home visits for clinical check-ins. I think that's, personally, I think that's fantastic as a patient to make that study design really helpful, less burden for the patient. In Alport syndrome, as you know, often folks are experiencing symptoms at a young age, and that might be the right time for them, especially if they're seeing their labs go in the wrong direction. So if you have, for example, a college student living away from home, they live in a dorm, don't have a car at school, that sort of situation, we do have a lot of Alport patients who are in that situation and experiencing decline. Is this something where, and I don't know, maybe it's Dr. Benjamin, whoever would like to address this, is that something that they would still qualify for this study? You think it would make it possible for them to participate by sending a nurse to their dorm room? I'm just trying to have some real world situations here, knowing what patients' lives are like. Is that something that would be possible? Or is that a site-to-site question?
Yeah, I can take that one. So it's sort of an individual discussion that person would want to have with the site, and get the full details of the number of times where they would need to go to the site and figure out what that frequency is. For the scheduling of the visits, there's a little bit of wiggle room, plus or minus a couple of days on them. And then I think we laid it out earlier in the presentation, but for, given visits, they could either be at home or on the site. So that's the type of situation where if they feel comfortable with those type of remote options that are away from the site, that's something that they could look into. But to get the full details on that, it would be best for that person to have a conversation with the site. But the short answer to your question is, if they meet the eligibility criteria and they're interested in participating, we can see if we can make the logistics work, essentially.
Excellent.
Yeah, we did revise our protocol based on some of the requests. Like we called it home, and now we add other option. So to open the door, well,
excellent. Thank you. I do have a question also. We're aware that a lot of patients, as I'm sure you are aware, not all Alport patients are really able to tolerate the current standard of care with ACEs and ARBs. If that's the case and you happen to be a patient who is not on an ACE or ARB regimen because you just can't tolerate, are they accepted? Would they be considered for this study? But could they be potentially even enrolled even though they're not on current standard of care?
Yes, that's again a great question, because the reason we include ACE and ARB is because it's a current standard of care. We don't want to test the drug, by removing the standard of care. So we want to see effect or additive effect on top of the ACE inhibitor. And if the patient do not tolerate, however, we'll still accept that patient to the trial with the double-blind randomization.
Excellent. We only have just a few minutes left. I want to also ask about currently now SGLT2 inhibitors are big conversation in the chronic kidney disease community. There may be patients who are Alport patients who are beginning to be prescribed SGLT2 inhibitors. Particularly, there's a new drug, Farxiga, that was approved just a few months ago for chronic kidney disease. Alport patients were not included in that study, so we have no idea of efficacy there. But if there are patients on SGLT2 inhibitors, would they be permitted to participate in the study?
At this point, we haven't discussed the details about that, and since it's not formally approved for Alport syndrome. But of course, any off-label use for patients, we have to consider that. At this point, we'll be carefully think about that, plan on that. At this point, we haven't think of careful about that. For this, especially for this trial, since I said this is a phase 2 trial, it's a relatively small study, and I think we'll be able to enroll all the patients to the trial before that. That's our strategy, I think.
Excellent. We just have a few moments more. So I just want to ask if there's anything else either of you would like to communicate to the Alport community about the study, how you see things going, if there's any other message you would like to share about the study, about the HERA study, or about Alport syndrome in general from your perspective.
I think this Alport, as we all know, is terrible disease, and we want to search for new therapy for patient. And at this point, we wanted to in the condition of make sure patient is safe, and we encourage all the eligible patient to join or look at the details, the study.
I do have one last question that just came in. I'm not sure that I understand it exactly, but a patient is asking what kind of expenses we can expect for the treatment. I'm assuming, but I don't know if this patient might be meaning if this were approved as a therapy, do we understand what kind of expenses? Is that something we just wouldn't understand at this point, or?
That's beyond at this point, the talking point, from me, because I don't think we have a clear defined cost for that yet. But I cannot comment on that question at this point.
Yeah, I would understand for the patient. I just know that now, having spent some time working with companies exploring Alport syndrome, I do understand that there's a whole process. If a drug should be approved, there's a whole process that has to be gone through with the FDA and insurers and to go to figure that out. So unfortunately, I do understand we're not in a position to know that at this point, but it is a good question. The most important thing is we hope that it will find efficacy with this treatment. And I really appreciate professionally, personally as a patient, and on behalf of the patient community and the board and staff of the Alport Syndrome Foundation, we're so grateful that you took the time today to help us understand more about this protocol, the study design, how it works, what would be expected of patients. Appreciate that so much. And I want to let the patient audience know, if you have additional questions, we seem to have gotten through all the questions today in the question and answer function. But if you think about it later and have questions, please reach out to info@alportsyndrome.org and we'll get right back to you, and we'll connect you to getting the information about answer to your question. I want to express my appreciation to the audience for joining us today. For Dr. Liu, to Dr. Benjamin, thank you so much for volunteering your time and accepting our invitation to join the community today and answer our questions. Thank you so much. Appreciate that very much. This session has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel from our website, so you can find it there, and we'll direct patients with questions about the study for more information to this recording in the future, so that folks can better understand the HERA study. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and the investment you're making in exploring Alport syndrome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for everyone to join this webinar.
Thank you very much.
Lisa. We appreciate it. We appreciate everyone tuning in.
Thank you so much. Bye all. Thank you.